Good afternoon. Thank you so much, John, for that introduction. And I'm very excited and honored to be asked to prepare a presentation for this very important commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. I'm going to get started this afternoon just giving you some background on a perspective on the National Park Service perspective towards race and reconciliation, which we commemorate, which we interpret, which we research through our national parks and programs. I always like to start off by giving a little background about the National Park Service. We are the federal agency that is authorized and given the responsibility to preserve the history and stories, national stories of the United States. We were founded in 1916. We currently have 12 regions, 423 national parks in our unit, in our stewardship right now. There are more proposed to be added to the national park system. Most of you know the large parks such as Yellowstone or the Grand Canyon, but most of our parks are actually in urban areas. Every person, a citizen of the United States, the average citizen is only 50 miles from a Park Service site. So yes, you know probably about our grand national parks, but our urban parks such as Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King Jr. Center, a lot of folks don't recognize those as being part of our national park system. We have over 72 community assistance programs. These are programs where we assist communities, individuals, to preserve and protect their own historic resources and to tell their own historic stories. Some of our programs that you may be familiar with are the National Register and National Historic Landmarks programs, the AfricanAmerican Civil Rights Network, which is one of our newest programs, and I'll expand upon that later in this presentation, as well as our various granting programs. Such as our African-American Civil Rights Grants, which give monies to local partners, state, local, federal governments, preservation organizations, and stewards in order to undertake historic preservation or preserve cultural resources or tell their stories within the community. The Park Service has over 21,000 employees and volunteers that work with us, and we usually have around 320 million individual visitors come through our park. We'll see what happened with COVID-19 in 2020, but we do estimate that the park has been used extensively even during the pandemic. As a way to continue wellness and recreation in the outdoors. As I was thinking about my presentation and thinking about what it means to have reconciliation, I thought about all of the aspects and components that have to go into to the process of reconciliation. There first has to be an act or multiple acts of offense, right? There has to be some type of acknowledgement that an act of offense has occurred. And on the part of the offended, there has to be forgiveness, but on the part of the offender, there has to be repentance, true and committed repentance. In order to be reconciled, you must have forgiveness, you must have repentance, but you also have to have the mutual duty of restoration, right? How do you move forward in a way, in a unified manner, from the grace of forgiveness and the commitment of repentance to get restoration and rebuild trust and unity? And so in thinking about that, I'm going to take you through a few of the national park units that are in this process, haven't reached it yet as a country, but there are sites where we talk about both the act of offense, forgiveness, and repentance and restoration. So first I want to talk about the act of offense. And I chose to focus on racial violence. You see here on my left, the Medgar and Myrlie Evers Home National Monument in Jackson, Mississippi. It is our newest national park unit, and it was designated as the site of the assassination of Medgar Evers and Myrlie Evers' continuing fight to bring those who murdered her husband to justice. We know that there was much extralegal violence against those who were seeking justice, seeking civil rights, seeking to confirm humanity of African Americans. And the violence has been perpetuated against them. And we at the Park Service recognize that these acts of violence often led to progress in some. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed, partly spurred by Mr. Evers' assassination in '63. On the left, there's Sand Creek Massacre site. This site is the site of the massacre of more than 250 Cheyenne and Arapaho Nation peoples, unarmed, on November 29th, 1864, by the United States Army contingent. The park was authorized in 2005 and opened in 2007. And so we recognize this as a massacre site. It was not until after the fact that the military, the United States government, did an investigation of the military action that was perpetuated on the unarmed group, and found that there was no military reason for the attack on these peaceful peoples. And then we come to reckoning, right? What happens when a people are pushed to the limit during a time of racial oppression, right? How do they protect themselves, or how do they respond to the racial violence that is being perpetuated against them? And we talk about these moments of reckoning in multiple parts, but two I'd like to highlight to you is Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument. Most of you probably know this site as Custer's Last Stand. Indigenous peoples also called this the Battle of Greasy Grass. And it is Custer's 7th Regiment defeat by the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho people, just a few years after the Sand Creek Massacre. The Sand Creek Massacre was perpetuated against Indigenous peoples that had agreed to give up their claim to land and had settled in land that was provided by the United States government and living peacefully. The Battle of Little Bighorn occurred between those Cheyenne, Lakota, and Arapaho that had not accepted reservation, right? They were still defending and protecting their homelands in the Northern Great Plains. And it was not until when this park was originally designated in the 1890s, I believe, the name of the site was Custer's Last Stand, Custer's Battlefield National Monument, because the interpretation told about the destruction of Custer's 7th Regiment, the 209 soldiers that died, but did not interpret the perspective of the Indigenous people that were being pushed off of their land. It was not until 1991 that Congress determined to change the interpretation of this national park site to talk about the Northern Plain Indian defense of their own homeland, as well as the military action by Custer and his men. And most of you are familiar probably with Harpers Ferry National Historical Park. Of course, this is the site of John Brown's attempted raid on the National Armory that was located there. These pictures are of the John Brown Fort, where he and his raiders attempted to hold up over the 3 days that the action took place at Harpers Ferry. That top picture is the fort. The fort was preserved in several different locations. It was removed from its original site 5 times over the course of its lifespan. And right here, it's on the campus of Storier College, a historically Black college founded in 1867 by Baptist missionaries to educate newly freed African Americans. And it was Storier College that saved the John Brown Fort and brought it back to Harpers Ferry. It was in Chicago, Illinois, prior to the Harpers Ferry National Historical Park being designated. And on the bottom is the fort today, which is replaced in the lower town of Harpers Ferry in its original location. One of the very interesting things about Harpers Ferry National Historical Park as they move forward towards centering the stories of those involved in the raid and legacies, they have held John Brown descendants events, as well as many of you may know that the Niagara movement, led by W.E.B. Du Bois and several other prominent African Americans, met at Harpers Ferry for their second meeting, their first meeting on the US side of the border. Their first meeting was in Niagara Falls, Canada, due to threats that were leveled against them for daring to begin to talk about what it looks like to have equality and civil rights within the United States. So reconciliation. I contend that all national parks as public spaces are also safe and brave spaces to talk about the violence, to talk about the oppression, to acknowledge, to gain forgiveness, to commit to repentance, and to work towards restoration. And 2 of the parks I'd like to highlight would be the Manzanar National Historic Site. Manzanar was one of 10 war relocation camps that were used to house Japanese Americans during World War II. More than 11,000 Japanese Americans were interned at Manzanar through from 1942 to 1945 when they returned to their communities. The park is a pilgrimage site for many of those who were interned, as well as their descendants. In 1969, the organization Manzanar Pilgrimage was established so that there was an annual meeting of descendants, allies, and former internees to return to the site and pay respects and remember and commit to future justice for Asian Americans, those of Asian ancestry, as well as to the broader community. The park has conducted over 640 interviews with former incarcerees there, their descendants, and government officials, military personnel that were involved in operation of the site, as well as the other 10 relocation sites and other detention centers around the country, to move forward to a restoration of relationships. Another I'd like to highlight is Selma to Montgomery National Historic Trail, which of course bridges from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. During the Jubilee celebration, commemoration of the walk from Selma to the Montgomery courthouse, we brought together nearly 200 youth, the general public, and park staff to do a 5-day journey recreating the march, learning during that time, learning about the marchers themselves. We had some of the original marchers join us at the march, and it has created a community, a cohort of people, of allies that are committed to moving forward with social justice, civil rights, and voting rights. So most people are, again, like I said, familiar with the national parks, but through our national programs, our community assistance programs, we're also looking towards acknowledging the past and moving towards reconciliation. One of our newest programs is the African-American Civil Rights Network, which was passed in 2018 to look at commemorating civil rights. The John Hope Franklin Reconciliation Park was added to the network just last year, June 29th, 2020, and we are looking forward to continuing this partnership. They were added under the banner of being a facility as well as a program that looks towards interpreting African-American history, civil rights, the racial oppression and violence and systemic racism, but also looking towards reconciliation of those events, towards education, interpretation, and looking at the recovery of the Greenwood area after the event, as well as the concentrated efforts to ensure that this story remained unknown. So what are the AACRN goals? The first goal is to simply make sure that the American public and the international community understands the importance of the civil rights movement, not only for the country, but in individual locales. We talk about the civil rights movement as a national movement, but it was a city by city, community by community fight. We also want to recognize the sacrifices by the people, the individuals that fought for equality, and the relevance of civil rights to the movement today. It is an ongoing fight as our current conditions allow, with Black Lives Matter and other debates that are going on around the country about education and where we're moving forward to. And so we have to make those threads, those connections to what's going on today. We accomplish our goals by providing the network, first of all, which is a list of sites, programs, and facilities that tell the civil rights story. We review the studies that have been done on a national level to see if there is additional information that we need to include. We produce educational materials, such as you see on the left, the Era of Reconstruction theme study, which looks at sites that should be preserved and protected through our National Register and National Historic Landmarks program that tell the story of African-American civil rights. And as you saw on the slide before, we've created a program logo that is used by official members of the network to denote their partnership with the National Park Service and federal government to tell the story of African-American civil rights. So to be eligible, you have to be a property, a facility, or program, as I mentioned before. Of course, have a verifiable connection to the civil rights movement. If you're coming in as a property, which you only have to be eligible under one of the categories, you do have to be listed in the National Register or determined eligible by the State Historic Preservation Office for the National Register of Historic Places. We do require owner permission. We can't list a site. Our property laws here are strong. For National Park Service programs, they have an additional criteria that their story must span the years between 1939 and 1968. If you see that picture of the Lorraine Motel, it is one of our few sites that came to the network as a property, a facility, and a program for is the site of MLK's assassination, but also for the Civil Rights Museum, the National Civil Rights Museum that is housed within the motel for research and interpretation and education purposes. So I just wanted to quickly put in the two program staff, myself, of course, but two of our direct program staff that works on AACRN. We will be having a workshop on teaching the skills to apply and directly apply to AACRN in late June. If you're interested, I highly urge you to contact myself or one of the program staff there, and we will ensure that you or your organization have an invite to the late June workshop for AACRN. And Jesse, I don't know if you could click this link there. This is a short video introducing the new superintendent for the Murley and Medgar Evers Home National Monument. The video is an introductory video introducing our new superintendent for the Medgar and Murley Evers Home National Monument. She is the first superintendent, Ms. Keena Graham, for the site. The site is not currently open, but they are seeking engagement by the public to determine how to interpret the site. We are definitely in partnership with the Medgar and Murley Evers Institute, as well as Tougaloo College, to ensure that we're telling the full story of Medgar and Murley Evers and their efforts to bring voting rights and civil rights to Mississippi and their national impact on the 1964 civil rights movement. We're not just focusing on the racial violence and the assassination of Mr. Evers. We are focusing on their life, on the work that they both did in order to bring about meaningful change within the community and in the world through their legacies. So thank you so much for allowing me to talk with you for a few minutes. I hope we have a lively discussion, questions, and thank you again.